welcome to the Bare Necessities. Today we are making baked apple fritters. It's something that's kind of a leave-over from my childhood. Of course, the ones that I ate then were deep fried because fried food. Amazing. And it's how I earned the body I had and have. These are going to be a little different. They're not deep fried, so that honestly cuts an enormous amount of the calories, but that's okay. We're going to put them back on with a glaze and a lot of sugar. So don't worry about that. They'll still be there. What you'll need for this recipe is, and there's going to be doubles across some of the ingredients, keep up with me, is 1 tablespoon of butter, 2 apples, and you want to peel them, core them, and dice them up kind of small, and then 2 tablespoons of sugar. So for those first 3 ingredients, what you're going to do is grab a old trusty pan, warm it up over a medium-low heat, throw your butter in, let it come up until it starts to brown. That means that you're going to let your butter cook. You'll see some of the solids really separate onto the bottom, and the butter will turn a nice caramelly color, and a little bit darker is what you want, like just the tiniest bit. Don't let it go too much because you can actually burn it too. Brown butter lends this an amazing amount of flavor. So just let it cook for a couple of minutes. Keep an eye on it. It will start to smoke if you overcook it. So just watch it for a little while. If you're using a dark pan, you'll still be able to kind of tell when the color difference is made, just because butter does make it very obvious when it's ready. And you're going to get that brown butter, and once the butter is browned, you're going to pop your apples into that and let them start cooking. Once they've kind of started to soften, maybe 3 to 4 minutes, keep stirring them just to kind of get everybody warm and everybody started in the process. Take the 2 tablespoons of sugar and just kind of pour it over them. That's going to help them caramelize a little bit faster, and it's going to lend them even more flavor and give them a sticky texture, which is what you want in order to be able to stick on the inside of the fritters and not make mixing nightmarish, because it can be. They'll just fall out. It's not fun. Once that's done, stir them in, keep it stirring, make sure the heat doesn't get too high because you don't want that sugar to burn either. You don't want it to turn into a caramel itself. You want it to help caramelize the apples. So you want them to stay mixed together and not separated. Mine cooked about 15 minutes on that, and I just kept stirring and stirring until I got nice brown pieces of apple. I didn't want them entirely overly cooked, so I took them off at about that point because they were all very soft and I didn't want them to go farther. I used 1 Granny Smith apple that I peeled, cored, and diced, and then I also used what's called an ambrosia apple. It's this really sweet, meaty apple. Another great one for this would be something like a Gala apple or even a Honeycrisp if you can get them. I know these are all somewhat expensive apples. I will ask you, probably avoid Red Delicious and Golden Delicious. Their interior structure is not quite strong enough to hold up to that. They'll turn into applesauce. They're great for snacking apples, but let's not use them for this recipe. They're great in pies too. So use an apple that's heartier. You can also just do 2 Granny Smith apples. They're pretty common. They're fairly easy to get in most American markets. I know there are some places that it's a little harder. Just make sure they're about the size of a good hand fruit. Like you can hold one in your hand. You don't want it to be too heavy. The total of the 2 shouldn't be over 1 pound, if that gives you an idea. I went ahead and already did that. I made mine kind of a smaller dice, and those 2 apples had cooked down to this. Once they cooked, I put this in the fridge with plastic over it. In my house, it actually sat for 24 hours. I thought I was going to be able to record yesterday, but things. So they just need to come down to a good room temperature. They don't have to be cold, so I've let these actually sit out for a little while just to kind of come back up. If they're too hot, they'll melt your dough, and again, they won't stay in it. So you'll have pieces of apple just kind of coming out while you're trying to mix it or while you're trying to bake them. With the apples, once you have those done, you will need a teaspoon of salt, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, which is what I have in here. It's the salt and the baking powder mixed together. Baking powder, just make sure it's all kind of broken up. It's really humid here in Austin, and it always is. And so my baking powder sometimes gets the little chunky skin. Just break that up. It's fine. It didn't deactivate. You're going to need 1 egg. You're going to need 1.5 cups of flour. What I have in mind is 1/2 cup of whole wheat and then 1 cup of all-purpose, just because I do like that whole wheat kind of flavor and the little bit of the texture it lends. And I like pretending that this is completely healthy. So that's one of the ways I do that. You also need a teaspoon of cinnamon for your spices, a 1/2 teaspoon of nutmeg, and then a 1/2 teaspoon of ground ginger. And if anybody's been watching any of my videos, you also know that more than likely there's grains of paradise in here. So I do have a full teaspoon of grains of paradise ground up and put in here as well. So this is my 4 spices. I have a tablespoon of melted butter. I have 1/4 cup of sugar, just granulated sugar. You can also use a sugar substitute like stevia or monk fruit for this, for the interior. That's fine. When you're cooking your apples, if you have something like Swerve, that'll be great because it does caramelize like sugars, and also monk fruit would work really well. Stevia doesn't really caramelize as well, but it does give them that nice sweetness that you want. So you're making some concessions here. And then I have a 1/2 cup of milk. So I went ahead and mixed together also a cinnamon sugar that you're going to roll your dough into. So I've just got 2 tablespoons of sugar and then a teaspoon of cinnamon, mixed it together. That way, as you make the dough, you can just roll it up, roll it in the cinnamon sugar, put it on the pan. It's going to lend it a really great flavor on the outside, and it makes it really pretty. Then once they are done and cool being the key word here, we're going to glaze them. And for the glaze, you're going to need 1¼ cups of confectioner sugar, a 1/4 teaspoon of vanilla, and you're going to need 2 tablespoons of milk, plus about a teaspoon, maybe depending on the consistency. We want it to be thicker, so we're going to start with just the 2 tablespoons, but we don't want it to be, super thick either. This is not an icing, it is a glaze, so it should drape over and pour off a little bit, but not too much. I also forgot, you need a teaspoon of vanilla in the batter too. So let's keep that one as well. All right, let's get started then. So into your mixing bowl, we're going to go ahead and put our 1½ cups of flour. Remember, this is 1 cup of all-purpose and then 1/2 cup of whole wheat. And into that, we're going to go ahead and mix our sugar, just to make sure it's well incorporated, our baking powder and salt, and then our 4 spices. Remember, this is cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg, and grains of paradise. If you don't have grains of paradise, that's okay. You can actually add a tiny bit of allspice to this, or cloves, just a pinch. Don't overdo it with cloves. And that'll give it somewhat of a similar flavor profile. And it adds something really nice. Next, we are going to go ahead and put our wet ingredients, which is going to include your apples. Come on. There we go. Our melted butter. You can use a butter substitute. You can even just use vegetable oil, or olive oil would be pretty decent in these. Avocado, really whatever you have. We're going to add our egg. Remember, never crack on the side of a bowl, because if you get the shell in there, good luck getting it back out. And we are going to go ahead and get that mixed a little bit. Add our splash teaspoon of vanilla. There's so many of those flavors that remind us of home. I don't know if it's a species-wide thing, but it's those warm, sweet flavors, the floral, that tells us something good's coming. And that's vanilla and cinnamon for me, which, oh my gosh, plus the apples. This smells amazing. Okay, it's fairly simple, comes together pretty quickly. Let me just clean off my wooden spoon here, because we want all of this, because it's going to be good. And I am going to go ahead and use my cookie scoop. I just like it because you get really good portions that way. You can kind of control the baking process when they're so much more even. So just take a scoop. If you're not going to scoop, use like you can use a measuring cup, a 1/4 cup measuring cup, or even just a good size like a tablespoon or something, like one of your soup spoons, and just kind of scoop it. Make sure you're eyeing it to keep it around the same size. That way they all bake in about the same time. Okay, and get that rolled in your cinnamon sugar goodness. Put it on the pan, give it a little pat, and keep going. So I'm going to not make you suffer through watching me do this in real time, because it will take a while. So let's zoom on through. Okay, so as you see, I have rolled them out. I made about 16. One of them is a teeny tiny bit smaller, which is great for me because then I get to taste it. I went ahead and used the extra cinnamon sugar that I had, plus, you know, what it had caked on, and put that over the tops of them, because why not just make them ridiculously good? So extra cinnamon, extra sugar, everybody's happy. So let's get these baking. You're going to have them in your 350-degree oven, as you saw the graphic pointing out for me, since I always forget to say it at the beginning. And you're going to bake them for about 13 to 18 minutes. I know that's so random. I'm going to shoot for about 15 and check them. I know my oven, that's about where they're probably going to be. So right at about 15 minutes, I will check them to make sure that they're okay, and then keep going if I have to. So let's get them in the oven, and I'll be right back. All right, everybody, so I'm back. The fritters ended up baking for about 16 minutes, so I had to add 1 extra minute, and they came out perfect. They have a nice tender feel to them, and of course the apple's going to leave them feeling just the slightest bit wet. That's okay, as long as they're not doughy. You don't want that, because raw dough, it expands, it hurts, it's not fun. So now we're going to make our glaze. These have set for 15 minutes, so it's going to be great to be able to just pour it right over and move on. So in here I have 1 1/4 cup, slightly bit more than that, of powdered sugar. And then I decided to go ahead and add about 2 teaspoons of room temperature butter, just because I really like the flavor that comes with it as well. But you don't have to. This glaze works great without it. And then I have my 2 tablespoons of milk. I'm going to add a pinch of salt. It's something we sometimes forget to put in things. It's just that little bit of salt that really brings out flavors. And then we need just a 1/4 teaspoon of vanilla, which is a splash. We're talking not much vanilla at all. So just that 1/4 teaspoon. And then we're going to add just a little bit of our milk, about half, about 1 tablespoon, and just start mixing this together. Now remember, we are making a glaze, not an icing, so you do need this to be on the slightly runnier side, but you don't want it to just be, you know, pour off liquid. At least I don't. I like my glaze to actually kind of set up on it slightly. You know, it's a treat, so I want to make this treat something that I enjoy. And I did go ahead, and that's just both tablespoons of milk. And if you have a humid home like I do, go ahead and sift your powdered sugar just to make sure there's no clumps as well. But there we go. Easy enough glaze, right? I'm going to grab one of the baking sheets that I used. I put everybody on that one, and then a cookie rack. You don't have to have a cookie rack. That's fine. You can use whatever you have that kind of will raise them up, or you can just put them back on the baking sheet. Leave the parchment on. It's easier to clean up then. Or if you're using foil or just spray, whatever, it's fine. And go ahead and put your fritters all over your cooling rack. And we are going to go ahead and spoon just a little bit of glaze onto each one. It will roll down slightly. All right, so I tested the glaze on one of them. It's a little thick even for me. That did come out to be more of an icing, so I went ahead and added about another teaspoon of milk, and this is much better. It's a pouring consistency that's not too watery, and that is what we want. If you see, it just comes off in a nice clean stream, leaves a pattern before sinking back in. So there we go. Gorgeous. I'm going to go ahead and get all of these a little bit glazed over. And there we have it. These are all glazed. They're going to continue to dry for about 5-10 minutes, just so the glaze can set up slightly on top. And then my boys finally, after waiting and waiting, get to have some breakfast. I hope you enjoy making this recipe as much as I did. I've never actually made these fritters before, and you know, I think I'm going to have to do it some more. They smell amazing. My house smells like the best bakery ever, and it's making me happy. I'm going to go ahead and grab the little tiny one that we made, which is hard to discern because they all puffed up really well. But it was this one. I'm just going to give it a little taste because curiosity. It's perfect. Soft, sweet, a little chewy. The apple in there has that nice texture to it that's got a little bit of a bite while it gives. The glaze is it's spot on. The butter really helped too. And then all the extra cinnamon sugar just kind of really throw it up there. It almost tastes like a really good apple pie. So until I see you again, which will probably be next week, let's hope. Return. Remember to hit that subscribe button too. I'll see ya. Bye.